Welcome, Gambit Chads. Today we're going to be looking at one of my favorite Magnus Carlsen games of all time that you almost certainly have never seen before. It's not what you think. The game began d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, b5, the Benko Gambit. So it is a gambit, so maybe that is what you thought. However, this game was played in 2006 when Magnus Carlsen was still 15. His opponent, Leif Erlend Johansson, also Norwegian, was 26 years old at the time and higher rated than him. But this game, Magnus played every single move, top engine move, or there's a couple cases where it was number 2 on the engine lines. Just unreal stuff. Just an unreal game. I love this one so very much. Let's get right into it. The Benko Gambit, he plays here b5, takes an a6. Why do we give this pawn like so? G6, knight out, and now finally taking. He gave the B and the A for the C pawns. What's the point? The point is that black here now has this excellent diagonal for the bishop, which pairs really nicely with these pawns gone. Open files for the rooks, and you'll see him take advantage of that really, really shortly. And also, you know, your entire structure is solid. There's no weaknesses in your camp, and white here struggles to develop a little bit in the Benko. The main move for white, actually, I mean, there's a few different options that white has, but is e4, which, you know, they got to go king takes f1 and then find a spot for their king in order to get their rook into the game and complete the development, which is like a little bit annoying. In the game here, white chooses a slightly different path, which is g3. And after d6, bishop to g2, okay, d6 to make sure white's pawn can't push, and the bishop gets out, and white and black both castle, you know, without much more trouble. But the bishop on g2 is not an excellent piece for white. It's staring at its own d5 pawn. Of course, the engine, I'm looking at it right now, plus 0.6. You can see the eval bar here, favoring white a little bit. Of course, it'll take the side with the extra pawn, whereas black has no, like, immediate knockout punch or anything. There's nothing immediately winning back a pawn. White's king is safe. However, black is going to have all the activity. As you'll see, they're going to put their pieces on some pretty nice squares. So queen to a5, we start with that. You'll note here white played this move rook to b1. It's a good move to play. It's a good move and a useful one for sure, because you're sidestepping all the pressure here. It allows you to play b3 at some moment without, like, your rook hanging. And that's going to be important because black might try to play c4 to take that away, or just, you know, completely pressure on b2 and a2. So being able to play b3 and maybe a4, maybe knight to b5, we'll talk about all those ideas very shortly. But white's also completing their development, playing queen to c2 to cover some squares on the queen side here, and rook to d1, just the last piece that needs to move out of the way of this bishop, which is also, you know, a well-placed bishop. You know, all of black's pieces kind of on ideal squares. So out of the way there, protecting d5, queen on c2, make sure white is still hanging on to their extra pawn. Okay, so both sides have really moved all their pieces onto some pretty decent squares here. Magnus still has his Gambit glasses on. The knights are not doing so much. And in fact, they're still blocking the bishop. So they're actually still, in theory, both sides are. And Magnus plays this nice move, knight to g4, opening up the bishop. The point is, like, you could play h3, but the knight actually wanted to come to e5 anyway, because its next path there, as bishop to d2 is played, bringing that piece out, its next path from g4 is e5. Right, so as both sides trade, you can see that this knight on e5 wants to come to that c4 square, where it can put a lot of pressure on b2, combined with the bishop putting pressure on the dark squares, the queen as well, or, you know, you can just hunt for that dark square bishop. So knight c4 would be a very nice move, and white stops it with this move, pawn to b3. You'll note, like, the bishop is on d2, but there's really no great square for the knight. You know, the only one probably would actually just give up the a2 pawn. So b3 makes sure white has actually everything defended in their camp, and what they're doing so far is quite logical, and they're following. We still have 26 games in the database here, and Magnus, still in preparation, which is actually really, really good stuff, plays this nice move, bishop to c8. Bishop to c8, which is probably, I see there's now 12 games in the database here. I'm not sure how many games there would have been in 2006, probably fewer than that. But bishop to c8 is a nice move. You'll note, like, c4 was probably possible, and maybe what was expected, because c4 is generally the strike you're looking for, particularly if there's not b4 as an easy response. White maybe would have tried to take advantage of this file that's going to open up, and now tried to defend their extra pawns. So c4 was possible, but bishop to c8 is a really nice move, and we'll talk about why. And I don't think white responded the best to it. They played knight to a4, which is an okay move, but probably not how white wants to be setting up. The problem with knight to a4, as Magnus just slides his queen back out of danger, is that it's not really doing anything on this a4 square. I understand the appeal that it can't really, it could be captured maybe on c3, and then there was a lot of pressure on a2. I think better for white was potentially this idea with pawn to a4 so that the pawn is not hit. Yes, b3 is a little weak, and maybe knight to b5 to follow that, right? Knight to b5 would be ideal. I think maybe the reason this wasn't played is because c4 looks like this pawn is very undermined, but c4 here, white does have b4, and rook takes would be a mistake. This knight can move, and black is losing something owing to that pin. So a4, I think, in my view, was a better setup for white, as white, often tries to do in the Benko, but knight to a4 is played, and queen to a6 sliding out the way, attacking e2, nice move, and better choice than probably any other spot for the queen, is now available because the bishop left. Right, so maybe knight to a4 had more of an appeal if you knocked the queen to like a maybe more useless post, but I think queen on a6 is doing something of use here, attacking e2, bishop to c3. So bishop to c3 doubles down on the setup that white just chose, knight to a4 and bishop to c3. I'll note, looking at the engine's telling white to actually just come right back knight to c3 to deal with the e2 pawn. Either the queen defends it or the knight defends it. But the bishop on c3, yes, it's good. You'll probably be able to make that trade, but the knight now is kind of locked in here for the long haul, and it's going to be kind of a rather difficult setup. And already, I'm looking at the engine, minus 0.3. So it's swung. Now even Stockfish is acknowledging black has an advantage now, because white... kind of struggling to come up with ideas. I think if white is able to achieve, so if black kind of does nothing here and white is able to achieve, yeah, f4, suddenly you see how much that swings. f4 would be huge, right? Because now this knight needs to go somewhere, this trade becomes big, this can come back into the game, e4, and now you can start looking at ideas like this. But a dark square bishop trade is what white is looking for, and this probably was the reason they played knight to a4 to set up bishop to c3. Alas, black does not play nothing here, and Magnus comes up with bishop to f5. Bishop to f5 is actually really nice because bishop to d7 is the move that you're looking at here if you're black, targeting this knight on a4. Bishop to f5 coaxes either pawn to e4 or bishop to e4, both of which are actually moves white does not want to do. e4, I think, also allows maybe bishop to g4 and holes here. But bishop to e4 played, right? You got to shield your queen and rook here. And now he comes back bishop to d7. So he drags that bishop into e4. And rather than just playing bishop to d7 directly, he makes sure that this bishop comes to e4, where it can be a future target, and we'll see how that comes into play. So pawn to f4 played. Pawn to f4 played. White is proceeding with their idea of trading dark square bishops, which is a notable achievement. Knight to g4. Take, right? So, okay, what has happened? This bishop is kind of in the way of maybe this pawn coming up and joining its friends. Knight to e3 is almost a threat, but I'll note there is queen to c3 check, so you would lose that knight rather than fork the queen and the rook so long as that resource is available. However, there's some strong ideas, because c4 is something black wants to play anyway, because that pawn is really frozen due to the overwhelming pressure on this knight. So c4 coupled with queen to a7 check, and we know kind of a knight here and a queen here slicing like this is extremely strong, right? So it can follow, queen to f2 check or knight to f2 check. These are really, really strong resources in the position for black. So he's immediately plays this move bishop to f3, which is very smart, because the bishop is misplaced on e4. Bishop coming to f3, now it can eliminate this knight at a moment's notice, and again, knight to e3 not possible because you are counterforked. Okay, c4 by Magnus. Very strong move. You're looking at queen to a7 check and ideas with that knight invading. And now here white tests the waters with e3, which I think is a very risky move. If I'm white here, I have also the benefit of looking at the engine, but I definitely want to eliminate this knight. This knight is a very, very dangerous piece. I understand there's a lot of concessions with the light square bishop uncontested around your king when you have mostly dark square pawns. Generally here, white should be okay. Maybe something like rook to b2 or knight to c3 to make sure you don't lose this e2 pawn that now goes under fire. But I think here white is mostly able to hang on. Maybe so something like king g8 to step out of checks. Yes, there's a lot of pressure that black is still going to be able to inflict down multiple lines, multiple weak points in white's position. But largely here, they are holding things together by virtue of eliminating that knight on g4. Keeping that on the board allows for a lot more resources that Magnus can play with. Let's see how that happened here. So pawn to e3, right? Again, okay, you can't put the knight there. You do lose it. But it does shield against queen to a7 check, right? Queen to a7 has actually played anyway, adding more pressure. Again, you could take it, although it's, not as good as... Or actually, you can't even. This is just check, and then now your extra pawn will be gone. So queen to a7 attacking e3 a couple times. Rook to e1 to defend that pawn. Right, so he's looking at ideas of maybe king g2, and maybe can you get these pawns rolling a little bit. The rook on d1, not doing much anyway. pawn takes b3, a takes b3, and now Magnus plays a move here I really like, because it looks like, okay, they might just take it now, and king g2 and e4 and undoing a lot of the problems of their position. And, right, the bishop has not been able to take on a4 also because the bishop has been tied down to the defense over here. Just knight to f6. Just knight to f6. You've already caused enough havoc in the white position. Bishop to f3, e3, rook to e1. These are not really like the best moves that white really, really wanted to be playing, rather than, you know, focusing on like open lines or pushing their extra pawn. You've caused a lot of havoc. The knight now comes back, shields this diagonal, prevents bishop takes g4 from happening ever again, and you get pressure on d5. You're also looking at potentially takes over here. But, you know, you might not just cash that all in and trade it into an endgame right away. You might add some pressure, rook b4, bishop to f5. We'll see those ideas happen in the game. So knight to f6, so that's not getting traded. That's not getting traded, which is what you want to do if you're down a pawn. You want to generally avoid trades. Rook to a1, sensible move here, trying to defend this knight from, you know, many attackers, as I mentioned. Rook to b4, just continuing to add in the position. Rook to b4, just massaging the weaknesses, as some grandmaster used to say. This pawn on b3, this knight on a4, this e4 square that we can control, just continuing to improve, right? This rook on a8 now has possibilities on both the b and c lines. King to h1, sliding out of the way here. I think the best move, and yes, white here has one move that's much better than the others. It's not super obvious. It's not super obvious or easy to play, but it is this move, knight to c3. And knight to c3 opens this. So it says, okay, if you just slide out the way, white trades rooks, which is a notable achievement, right? If you're able to trade rooks, then there's less dudes that can attack b3 or you know, get down here and invade you. White even has a nice idea here, knight to e2, the knight can come to d4. It's actually a really nice square for the knight. c6 would be a dream, right? So white can actually start making some progress here. If you're black after knight c3, what I'm sure Magnus had in mind, and also what Johansson had in mind, why he didn't play knight c3, is that you can take a1. So 2 rooks for the queen, which is generally a good haul, though, you know, it depends on the scenario. And maybe something like rook a3 here, attacking this b3 pawn. It requires maybe some passive defense. Bishop to d1 makes this pawn not so easy to capture. Now, if you capture it, okay, we just trade into a drawn endgame, right? So, you know, you got to figure something out here, look at some other things to attack if you're black. But this was generally much easier to hold than the position in the game. The position in the game, all of black's pieces, and there were plenty of them, became very, very active. So knight to c3 was another chance here for white to trade some things off, however that's going to go. King to h1, still trying to cling on to this extra pawn, becomes very, very difficult very quickly. So rook to c8, nice move, bring that rook on a8, which was kind of dead, and also, you know, bait to be traded into the game here. Queen to d1, you'll note none of white's pieces have really gotten anywhere all game. And queen to b7, so just sliding everything off this A line. Queen to b7, not only are we putting pressure on d5, but also b3 here, after the queen has done its job. Along this diagonal, causing the rook to come to e1, the pawn to come to e3, the king to come to h1. Just, white's just responding to just little things black is doing. Knight to g4, knight to f6, rook to b4, rook to c8, queen to b7. It's these little things that add up that white has to keep reacting to. So finally, he's had enough of that and plays e4. The point being that giving back this extra pawn to play e5, which looks pretty scary, actually. These pawns look good. You don't want to free this guy, because say like e6 happens and pawn takes e6, well, that actually does attack the queen, maybe. Although, you know, maybe I stand corrected, the bishop is hit. But, you know, white is generating their own stuff, and at first glance, the only squares for the knight are g8 and e8. I'll note here, white did have the option of, like, again trying to hang on to this pawn, but at this point it's just almost completely unplayable. For example, rook to b1, that's a big mistake. Bishop to f5, you don't have e4 here, that's attacked too many times, so you can't even do that. So rook to b2 to hang on to that actually loses a knight, which is worse. Rook to e3 if you're really desperate, but again, bishop f5, you don't have e4, and at minimum bishop c2 or rook to c2 if you're starting to talk about, you know, mating ideas along there. But bishop to c2 and that pawn will get completely snatched, and then these pieces will be floating without homes or good coordination among the white pieces. So e4, rook takes b3, e5, finally trying to force black to do something that white is on the front foot for, you know, pushing the knight back to e8 or g8. But Magnus says, no, I'm actually not going backwards. For the record, black still actually has a pretty good advantage after knight to g8 or knight to e8, but the absolute best move in the position the absolute best move, knight to g4. Comes back, knight to g4. Says, dare you. I dare you to take on g4. And also, you know, this knight, if not taken, well, first of all, you're threatening a fork here, knight to e3, among other things with the bishop under pressure here. So, Johansson takes it, taking queen takes g4. So he grabs that extra piece. He grabs that extra piece, and it's not immediately obvious how black is winning the game right away, right? So I'll note here that this is a good practical choice. If you are suffering, if your position is bad, and, you know, there's all sorts of threats, and your position just sucks, and you're probably losing, if your opponent ever offers you a pawn, a knight, anything, any material, and you're not losing immediately as a result, take it. That's my advice. Just take it, because then you have a win condition. You're defending for something. If the attack fizzles out and you can trade queens, then you get into an endgame there. Okay, you now have the extra pawn. Or if you need to give back a pawn or give back any material at any time so that your king may live, you can do that, and you're still not losing the game in an endgame necessarily. So defend for something is what I'm saying, rather than here where white has, you know, lost their extra pawn here and is now temporarily defending for nothing. Here they have a prayer. They have a prayer. Takes twice here. Queen takes d5, check. King to g1 only move. So this king has actually been torn open. These were not really moves that white wanted to do, but situations kind of forced them to make those things happen. Okay, he didn't just sacrifice a piece just for fun. Here comes rook to c2, trying to go queen or rook into g2, and this is where I'll actually turn the engine off, because I want you guys to start finding these moves. First of all, why queen to h3 played in the game to stop queen g2? Why not rook e2? Pause the video, tell me. That's right. Queen to d4 check wins that rook. This rook, the rooks were coordinated, defending each other. Now they will not be. Trade here, eat that one, resigns. So queen to h3 forced. Queen to h3 forced. Now we step up, queen to d4 check, king to h1, and this is the big move. This is going to be a big pause the video moment. I want you to find this. I said it like it's going to be some like crazy sacrifice. It's not. It's just a really, really good move that wins. And it's not so obvious. It's not so obvious, because you can go check here, check. Okay, we have a draw. We have a draw. And also, I'll state for the record, Magnus had to find this move in this position. At minimum, maybe even further back, right? When you sacrifice the knight here, he needed to make sure, because if he plays knight e8 or knight g8, he still has a very good position. So he's giving up a very good position for a large risk, giving up this knight. So he better be sure that this is working, right? So he's calculating this position all the way back there 6 moves ago. What to do? What to do? You can kind of get the sense, right, that what you want to achieve in this position is both rooks on the second rank, right? This is the misplaced rook. It's not hitting, like that's very well defended. You don't have the b2 square. This knight is finally doing something for the first time in this game. It's guarding against rook to b2, and it's not so obvious how you're going to get them here. I think if you play something like rook to d3 to try go here, my instinct is it's too slow. I'm not sure that you are losing. Actually, that might have been one. Check here, d3. Yeah, you could try to trade. No, you still need to find the winning resource in this position. Yeah, because white can try to trade. Here, here. Oh. You could try to win this knight. You could try to win this knight. So rook to d3 and rook to d2. I'll give it to you. I'll give it to you. It's not as good as the move Magnus played, but if that's your idea, here, to go check to bring a rook to g2 with enough firepower, I'll give it to you. In the game, his move was better. His move was better. Because it's rook to e3. Rook to e3. Why is that so good? Well, for starters, you can't take it, because takes here. That will be checkmate. Boom. Yum, yum, yum. What rook to e3 does is it clears, it not only threatens rook to e2, right, which it does. So if white just does nothing in the position and black is moving again, rook to e2, you can play it, takes, queen takes a1, and continue to eat. But it also clears the way for an even more powerful threat of queen to e4 check. So rook to e3 blocked this rook's control of e4. So queen to e4 check will now threaten to pick off that rook. And now, right, queen, you're realizing it's not so easy to keep the queen out of e4 if you can't, especially if you can't take this. You realize also if you move this rook at all, then the queen comes to e4, and this rook comes to e2 if that is not under control by anybody else. And with the rook on e2, it's simply coming to rook g2, and there's nothing you can do about it. So like here, rook g2 check, that's it. That's it. King to h1 and check and mate, among other mates, or here and mate. I mean, this piece has got fully all the way deep into your position with no way out. So rook to e3, white plays the one move that can prolong the game, which is queen to f1. So queen to f1 makes sure that against queen to e4 check, actually, king to g1, it's not so easy to play rook e2. You can trade there, so it defends the rook that is defending the e2 square, notably queen to f1. And it also, you know, does the other important job of the queen of keeping black's pieces out of g2. So how do you win here? How to win here now? What was the queen doing on h3 that's not doing on f1? Defending h2. Queen to d2, and white resigns. Attack on h2. There's no rook e2. We've got too many guys right there. And if queen to g1, now we come back queen to d5 when there's no squares for the white king with checkmate imminent. Just a brilliant, brilliant game from a 15-year-old Magnus Carlsen. No notes, really. No notes. Brought all of his pieces out to great squares. You can see his first 12 moves. In 12 moves, he's moved every single one of his pieces to ideal spots. He's continuing to abide by the principle of improve your worst piece. He gets his pieces out. He castles early, right? Queen to a5. Rook to b8 puts the rooks on the open lines. These aren't just things I say. These are actual good ideas employed by the greatest players who've ever lived. Bishop on the open diagonal. He wants the other bishop to have an open diagonal. So what does he do? He's also focusing on improving his worst piece once that worst piece has changed, right? So he moved them all. Knight to g4, out, knight to e5. Open bishop, threats, that'll come. Takes. We're looking at some nice squares now, and now from here is where the finesse really starts. It's where the finesse really starts because it's not a simple formula at this point. But bishop to c8, opening up the rook here, that was not a good piece. The bishop had done its job this direction. Knight to a4, queen to a6, stepping out of danger, attacking e2 here, and I really like this important point. Bishop to f5, drawing the bishop to e4, and then only then coming back to d7, pressuring here. Right, the bishop was dead on c8. Every time, it's almost the worst piece here. Knight to g4, trade here. And now finally he's punching through c4, trying to make those pawn trades happen and those weaknesses happen where to free the power of the rooks. Slides back, queen to a7. And these are just little things like queen a7, queen a6, knight here, but these are such big reactions that white is having to do. Rook to b4, just nice, like he makes it look so easy. Obviously playing perfect chess is not this easy, but it's good to aspire to be it, and it's good to try to learn, to try to emulate what the best players of our time are doing. Shout out to 15-year-old Magnus Carlsen. You're not so bad.
William Grave, the Gambit man, takes his seat at the board. e4, e5, knight f3, bishop c5. The Bushcast Gambit on the board. On with the Gambit classes. Hero pod unlocked.